mansion stood silent. But inside, a storm was gathering, a storm that would not stop until the woman who had stolen everything faced the ruin she deserved. The siblings waited for their chance, and it came sooner than expected. The second wife had gathered relatives in the drawing room. Draped in expensive silk, she spoke with false sweetness, declaring herself the rightful guardian of all that their father had built. Her son sat smugly beside her, a mirror of her arrogance. The daughter entered quietly, her steps calm but her eyes sharp. The brother followed, carrying a file of documents pressed close to his chest. The air thickened as all eyes turned toward them. "Baji," the second wife said with mock courtesy, "you must understand. This house, these lands, they are secured for my child. Your father wished it so. It is better you accept and not bring shame." The daughter's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Shame," she echoed softly. "Shame lies not in losing wealth, but in stealing it." A hush fell. The brother stepped forward, placing the papers on the table. Slowly, deliberately, he spread them out, one by one. "The servants remember," he said, his voice steady. "The nurse remembers. The lawyer remembers. And these papers," he tapped a trembling signature, "this is Baba's real hand, weak but true. Unlike the bold, practiced strokes of your forgery." The second wife's face tightened, though she forced a laugh. "Forgery? Child, grief has clouded your mind. Do you think you can stand against me with scraps of gossip?" The daughter leaned closer, her voice a whisper only the woman could hear. "We don't stand against you. We wait for you to collapse under your own lies." For the first time, the second wife faltered. Her eyes darted toward the documents, then to the watching relatives. She masked it quickly with a scoff, but the siblings had seen it, the crack in her armor. The brother gathered the papers calmly. "This is not the court," he said. "This is only the beginning. We wanted you to know, your time of ruling in shadows is ending." They turned and walked away, leaving behind silence so heavy it pressed against every wall. The second wife sat frozen, her smile stiff, her hand trembling beneath the folds of her silk. She had survived by fear and deceit. But now, fear was slipping from her control. The war had begun, night fell heavy over the house. The chandeliers were dimmed, the halls hushed, but the second wife did not sleep. She sat in her room, a single lamp burning, her sharp eyes fixed on the flicker of its flame. The siblings' defiance echoed in her ears, a thorn she could not ignore. She had underestimated them. Once, they were silent shadows, children too broken to resist her. But grief had sharpened them, and courage had made them dangerous. She poured herself a drink, her bangles clinking softly, and whispered into the silence, "So they think they can fight me. Let them try." Her son entered, restless and impatient. "Ami, why are you letting them speak this way? Throw them out. This house belongs to us." She looked at him with a cold smile, stroking his hair as if he were still a child. "Patience, Beta. They are clever, yes, but cleverness without power is like a sword without a blade. I will show them who controls this house." The next morning, whispers began to spread among the relatives and neighbors. Ugly rumors, carefully planted, slithered through the walls. They said the siblings were greedy, that they plotted to ruin their father's widow. They said the daughter was ruthless, the son weak and easily manipulated. Servants, once sympathetic, began to hesitate when the siblings spoke. Old allies turned cautious, afraid of being dragged into the storm. The daughter noticed it first. Returning from the market, she heard two women muttering by the gate, their eyes filled with suspicion. The brother, too, saw the shift. Friends who had promised help now avoided his calls. The second wife's poison was working. But instead of despair, the siblings felt something else, a strange fire in their veins. If she wished for war of whispers, they would answer with truth louder than lies. That night, they sat together in their father's old study. Dust still clung to the shelves, but in the dim light they found strength in one another. "She wants to break us apart before we can rise," the brother said, his voice tight with frustration. The sister placed a hand on his arm. "Then we don't let her. We don't fight her lies with anger. We fight them with proof, with dignity. Let the world see her mask crack by itself." He looked at her and nodded slowly. For the first time, he saw not just his sister, but a leader. And though the second wife believed she was tightening her grip, she did not realize the more she tried to strangle them, the stronger their resolve became. The siblings were no longer just heirs. They were becoming warriors of truth. The siblings rose before dawn. While the house still slept, they moved quietly through the old corridors, searching, remembering, piecing together fragments of a past their stepmother had tried to erase. In the storeroom, behind stacks of forgotten trunks, the sister found a wooden box with their father's initials carved faintly into the lid. Inside lay old letters, bank records, and contracts, proof of his love, his trust, and his careful plans for their future. The brother's hands trembled as he held the papers. "She tried to bury this," he whispered, "but Barbara's truth still breathes here." Meanwhile, outside the house, the sister began reaching out in secret. She visited their father's loyal workers, men who had labored in the fields and shops under his fair hand. One by one, she reminded them of the kindness their father had shown. Some hesitated, fearful of the second wife's wrath, but many remembered. Quiet nods, whispered promises, and old loyalties began to awaken. Inside the house, the second wife grew restless. She noticed the siblings' calm faces, their strange silence. Her son complained bitterly, "Ami, they look at me like they know something. Why aren't you stopping them?" She forced a smile, though unease gnawed at her. "Let them play their games. When the time comes, I will crush them." But her unease was not misplaced. One evening, the siblings entered the main hall where the relatives had gathered for a family dinner. The second wife, adorned in silk and jewels, presided like a queen. She expected meek silence, but instead the daughter stood tall, her voice clear. "You speak of honor, Choti Ami. You speak of loyalty. But honor is not built on whispers. Loyalty is not bought with lies. We have proof of Baba's words, his plans, and the legacy he trusted us to guard." Gasps echoed through the hall. Papers were laid bare on the table. The brother's hand did not tremble as he read their father's own writing aloud, words naming his children, his love for them, his wishes for their protection. The second wife's smile faltered. Her eyes darted, her hand clenched the edge of her chair. The son rose in fury, but the relative's stares cut sharper than any blade. Murmurs began, doubt spreading, her mask cracking. For the first time, the siblings had turned defense into attack. They had drawn first blood in a battle that was only just beginning. The stepmother did not sleep that night. Her son stormed into her room, pacing like a restless beast, his anger dripping with venom. "Ami, they dare to stand against us now? Those nobodies. We should crush them before their voices grow louder," he hissed, his fists clenched. Her eyes burned with rage, but her mind remained sharp. "They found something, Beta. Some papers your father must have hidden. But listen to me, truth is not enough. People believe power, not proof. And power is still in our hands." The next morning, the house was filled with whispers. Relatives who had witnessed the confrontation the previous night spoke cautiously, torn between what they had seen and the authority the stepmother still held. She moved quickly, arranging meetings with lawyers, calling in favors from men who owed her, and spreading rumors that the siblings were ungrateful children fabricating lies out of jealousy. When the siblings arrived at the estate to gather more evidence, they were met by hostile guards at the gate. "You're not allowed here anymore," one said coldly. The sister clenched her fists. Her brother tried to argue, but it was useless. They were turned away like beggars from their own home. Later that week, false notices began arriving, legal papers claiming debts their father supposedly owed, threatening repossession of the small property they were still living in. The brother read them with trembling hands, his chest tightening. "She's trying to break us, one step at a time." The sister placed her hand firmly on his. "She can only break us if we bow. Abba left us strength, not weakness. We will fight." But the stepmother was not done. She called a lavish gathering in the city, inviting influential figures, relatives, and journalists. Draped in jewels, her voice sweetened with practiced sorrow, she stood before them all and declared, "My husband's children, they are lost. They accuse me, the woman who raised them, of crimes. They dishonor their father's memory. Everything I have done, I did for this family, yet they repay me with betrayal. Tears glistened on her face, crocodile tears, but enough to stir doubt in many hearts. Cameras flashed, voices murmured. Her son stood proudly by her side, a hand on her shoulder, glaring at anyone who dared question her. News of the gathering spread quickly. For a moment, it seemed the siblings' courage had been silenced beneath her show of wealth and false grief. Alone in their small room, the sister whispered, "She is poisoning the world against us." But the brother's eyes lit with a determined fire. He reached into the box of old records, pulling out one particular letter they had not yet revealed. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. This is what she fears most. Not rumors, not accusations, truth, written in Abba's own hand. And when the world reads this, no mask will save her. The stepmother had played her move, but the game was far from over. The brother and sister knew the storm was coming. After the stepmother's grand performance in the city, the air around them grew heavy with whispers and threats. But the real blow arrived one night, sudden and brutal. The door to their small home rattled, then burst open. The stepmother's son stood there with two hired men, his shadow stretching long in the lantern light. His eyes gleamed with cruelty. "You think you can embarrass my mother in front of the whole city?" he spat, stepping forward. "You think you can steal from us, from me? You're nothing. You always were nothing." The brother pushed his sister behind him, his body trembling but firm. "This isn't your home. Leave." The son laughed, a dark, mocking sound. "Leave. This will be mine soon, your house, your name, everything. You can fight with papers and dreams, but the world listens to money. And money listens to me." One of the hired men shoved the brother hard against the wall. His head struck wood, the pain sharp, but he refused to fall. The sister screamed, rushing forward, only to be yanked back by another hand. "Enough," she shouted through tears. "Is this what you've become? Beating your own blood for greed?" The son's jaw tightened. For a brief second, a flicker of shame crossed his face, but it vanished, replaced by rage. He grabbed the box of documents from the table and threw it to the ground, scattering papers across the floor. "You won't win. Even if you crawl to court, even if you shout to the heavens, no one will believe you. I'll make sure of it." Then, with a final shove, he stormed out, his men following. The house was left in shambles, the siblings shaken but not broken. The sister knelt, gathering the scattered papers with trembling hands. Among them, one letter slipped free, its seal still intact, never opened. The brother picked it up slowly, his fingers brushing over their father's handwriting. "He left this for us," the brother whispered, voice raw. He knew this would happen. The sister's eyes filled with tears, but this time they burned with resolve. "Then this is our weapon. Not anger, not revenge. The truth Abba trusted us to carry." They held the letter together, a fragile piece of paper carrying the weight of a family's honor and a father's final wish. The stepmother had unleashed fear and violence, but in her fury, she had overlooked the one thing that could destroy her. And now, that truth was ready to be revealed.
The brother and sister spent the night in silence, the unopened letter lying between them like a sacred flame. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind felt like danger creeping closer. Neither dared to sleep. By dawn, the sister finally broke the stillness. "We can't keep this here. She'll come for it." The brother nodded, his hand hovering over the letter. "But if we take it straight to the court, she'll try to block us. We need someone honest, someone who'll witness it being opened." Before they could decide, there came a sharp knock at the door. 3 times. Slow. Heavy. They froze. The sister whispered, "It's her." The brother motioned for silence. He tucked the letter deep inside his shirt and went to the door. When he opened it, the stepmother herself stood there, draped in expensive fabric, her face carefully painted with false sorrow. Behind her loomed her son, his eyes burning. "My children," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I came to make peace. Last night was unfortunate. Boys lose their temper. But we are still family." The sister stepped forward, fists clenched. Family? You sent men to hurt us. The stepmother raised a hand as if wounded by the words. Lies. My son would never. And what is this I hear about secret documents? Hidden letters? My late husband trusted me, not two children chasing fantasies. Her gaze swept the room, sharp, searching. The brother felt the letter against his skin like a burning coal. The son sneered. Hand it over. Whatever scraps you think will save you. You're only making this worse for yourselves. The brother straightened, his voice firm though his chest pounded. We have nothing to give you. And if you force your way in again, you'll answer to the law. The stepmother's smile faltered for the first time. For a heartbeat, her mask slipped and the venom underneath showed. Then she leaned closer, her whisper low and dangerous. You think the law cares about orphans? You think anyone will stand against me? Give me that letter, or I will bury you so deep, no one will even remember your names. The sister's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. Then you'll see what happens when the truth comes out. For the first time, the stepmother's face hardened completely. The mask was gone. She turned sharply, motioning her son to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. Enjoy your little victory. It will be your last. The sibling stood in silence as she left, the weight of her threat filling the air. Only then did the brother take out the letter again. His hand shook as he broke the seal. The father's words emerged, ink faded but strong, written in a hand that trembled with both love and urgency. And within those lines lay not just their salvation, but the stepmother's downfall.
The brother's fingers trembled as he unfolded the yellowed paper. His sister leaned close, holding her breath as though the air itself might disturb the words. The letter began simply, My beloved children, if these words have reached you, then I am no longer by your side. Know this first, I never abandoned you. Every day of my life, my love for you was greater than wealth, greater than power, greater than breath itself. The sister clutched her chest, tears already spilling. The brother's jaw tightened as he read on. You must beware. The woman I married after your mother's passing is not what she pretends to be. I discovered her schemes too late. Her hunger is endless. She will stop at nothing to take what is yours, what your mother and I built for you. Their eyes widened. The words felt like echoes of the dangers they had just faced. I hid the truth where only you could find it. Behind the old wood panel in my study, in the safe no one knows exists. There, you will find the documents that prove the inheritance is yours, and hers is nothing but a lie. Take them to the magistrate, for only there will the law protect you. The brother's hands tightened around the letter. But the final lines struck even deeper. And if the worst should happen, if she strikes against you, know this, I left witnesses. Trusted men who know the truth and will speak if you are in danger. She cannot silence everyone. You are not alone. The letter ended with a shaky signature. The father's final mark of love and defiance. The sister wept openly now, whispering, he knew, all along, he knew what she was. The brother folded the letter with care, his face set in determination. Then we cannot waste time. Tonight, we go to the study. We find that safe. And we end this. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere beyond the walls, a figure lingered in the dark, watching their window with cold, patient eyes. The battle for truth had only just begun. That night, the mansion slept under a veil of silence. Shadows stretched long across the corridors, the kind of silence that presses against the skin and makes every heartbeat sound like thunder. The brother led the way, a lantern hidden beneath his cloak, casting only the faintest glow. His sister clung close, her breath shallow, her fingers twisting in the folds of her dress. Every step down the grand hallway felt like a betrayal against the house itself. The portraits of ancestors loomed from the walls, their painted eyes watching, warning. At last, they reached the study door. The brother pressed his ear against the wood, no sound. He turned the handle slowly. The door groaned open, its protest loud in the silence. The room smelled of old leather and dust, exactly as their father had left it. Books stood like soldiers on the shelves, the great desk still scattered with papers that time had yellowed. The sister whispered, "The letter said behind the wood panel." "Which one?" The brother moved toward the far wall, where heavy panels lined the shelves. His fingers tapped each section, listening for a hollow echo. At the third panel, the sound changed empty, concealed. His heart raced. He pried the edge with a knife. The panel shifted, revealing darkness within. And there, embedded in the wall, a small iron safe stared back at them. The sister's eyes widened. He was telling the truth. But before relief could settle, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy. Steady. Moving closer. The brother froze. The sister's face turned pale. The footsteps stopped just outside the study door. Then, a hand pressed against the wood. The faint creak of weight leaning forward. The brother quickly replaced the panel, covering the safe, and pulled his sister into the shadows beside the heavy curtains. The latch turned. The door opened slowly. In the flickering moonlight that seeped through the window, the figure of their stepmother appeared. Her silhouette was sharp, her presence suffocating. She stepped into the study, her eyes scanning the room with a predator's patience. She whispered into the air, almost to herself, "I know you're here." The siblings held their breath, hidden in the darkness, the truth of their father's legacy just behind a thin wooden panel, so close, and yet almost lost. The stepmother lingered in the doorway, her presence filling the study like poison seeping into water. The siblings pressed themselves deeper into the shadows of the curtains, their lungs aching with the effort of silence. Her eyes swept over the desk, the shelves, the rug. She took a slow step forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor, each sound a dagger to the siblings' hearts. She paused near the wall where the hidden safe lay concealed. Her fingers traced the edge of the panel, almost as if guided by instinct. For one dreadful moment, it seemed she might uncover everything. But then, she drew her hand away, sighing. "You think you can outsmart me," she muttered, her voice low and venomous. "But this house belongs to me now. All of it. Even your secrets." She moved to the desk, rifling through the papers with deliberate slowness. Dust rose in thin spirals, glinting in the moonlight. After a moment, she selected one brittle sheet, folded it, and tucked it into her gown. The siblings exchanged a terrified glance. What had she taken? Finally, with a sharp turn of her heel, she left the study. The door closed with a soft thud, leaving the silence behind once more. The brother exhaled shakily, his hand trembling as he clutched his sister's arm. "We can't wait any longer," he whispered. "She suspects something." The sister nodded, her fear hardened into resolve. "Then we open it. Tonight." They hurried back to the panel, pulling it open with desperate hands. The iron safe glared at them in the darkness, its lock unyielding. The brother withdrew a small brass key. The very one their father had left him in a sealed envelope years ago. With trembling fingers, he slid it into the keyhole. A click echoed through the study, louder than thunder to their ears. The safe door creaked open. Inside lay a bundle of papers, thick and bound with a faded ribbon. And on top of it, glimmering faintly in the lantern's glow, a small brass emblem, the family crest their father once wore proudly. The sister reached out, her hands shaking, and lifted the bundle. The first page bore a single line in their father's unmistakable handwriting. "For my children, and no one else." The sister's hands trembled as she untied the faded ribbon. The papers smelled of ink and time, their edges yellowed, but the words were carved deep, as if their father had pressed the pen with deliberate weight. The first letter began with his familiar salutation, "My dearest ones." Her throat tightened as she read aloud, her voice breaking. "If you are holding this, then I am long gone, and the walls of this house no longer echo with my steps. But know this, I never left you without a shield. Everything they covet, everything they plot to steal, it is already yours." The brother leaned closer, his eyes scanning the words. Their father had detailed accounts, investments, and deeds, hidden wealth that the stepmother had never known about. Properties in their names, bonds locked away in a bank beyond her reach, and instructions for how to claim it all. But then, at the bottom of the page, there was a warning. "Trust no one within these walls. She will hunt what she cannot see, and destroy what she cannot possess." Your safety lies not in what you inherit, but in how you protect it. The sister's voice faltered. She looked at her brother, her eyes wide with fear. He knew what she was capable of. The brother clenched his jaw. Then we have to act as if we are blind. We must let her think she has one. They turned to the next page, where a crude map was sketched in their father's rough hand. It marked not only the house, but an old cottage at the edge of the estate, one they had almost forgotten existed. Scrawled beside it were 3 words, "Your true refuge." The siblings exchanged a look. The safe, the letters, the map, it all pointed to something larger than the estate itself. Their father had not simply left them wealth. He had left them a plan. And now, with the stepmother prowling like a vulture, that plan was their only chance at survival. The sister pressed the bundle to her chest. "We can't let her know we've found this." "Not yet." The brother nodded, blowing out the lantern until the room sank back into darkness. "Then tomorrow, at dawn, we go to the cottage." At dawn, the siblings slipped out of the manor in silence. The air was damp with mist, the kind that clung to their clothes and softened the edges of the world. Every step toward the forgotten cottage felt like a trespass into a secret their father had guarded with his life. The path was half swallowed by weeds. Broken branches clawed at their sleeves as if warning them to turn back. But the brother pressed on, holding his sister's hand tightly, his jaw set with quiet determination. When they finally reached it, the cottage stood like a ghost from another time, its windows clouded, the wood sagging under years of neglect. Yet the door bore their father's mark, a small iron carving of a lion, the family crest, untouched by rust. The brother pushed it open. The hinges groaned, and the scent of old timber and earth washed over them. Inside, everything was frozen in dust and stillness, but beneath the decay, there was intention. Their father had left the place as though expecting them. Against the far wall stood a chest. Heavy, iron-bound, locked with a mechanism unlike anything they had seen before. The sister knelt, tracing her fingers across its surface. Symbols, strange, almost like riddles, were etched into the iron. She whispered, "It's not just a lock. It's a puzzle." The brother crouched beside her, his heart pounding. The symbols aligned with the same sequence of letters they had seen in their father's papers. Slowly, carefully, they pressed each one in order. The chest shuddered, then released with a metallic click. Inside lay a velvet bundle. The sister lifted it with reverence, unwrapping layer after layer until a book emerged, its leather cover scarred, its pages bound with golden thread. On the cover was their family crest, larger and brighter than they had ever seen it. The brother opened it. What lay inside was not money, nor deeds, nor jewels. It was knowledge. Their father had written everything. His suspicions, the truth about the stepmother, her past dealings, even the names of those who had helped her before she entered their lives. Every secret she thought buried lay in these pages. But at the back, there was more, letters addressed to powerful allies, sealed but never sent. Instructions for the siblings on how to bring her to justice, not through vengeance, but through undeniable truth. The sister's breath caught. This is what she fears. The brother closed the book, his hand trembling but firm. Then this is what will destroy her. Behind them, the wind howled through the cracks of the cottage, as though their father's spirit whispered his approval. They did not yet know how dangerous the path ahead would be, but one thing was certain, the stepmother's reign over their lives was nearing its end. The siblings returned to the manor before dawn's light could betray them. Their hands clutched the book as though it were a weapon, yet neither spoke a word. The weight of their father's truth pressed heavier than chains. At breakfast, the stepmother's voice floated through the hall, sweet and sharp as glass. "You're up early," she said, her eyes flicking over them with suspicion. "Plotting something?" The sister forced a smile, lowering her gaze. "Just restless." But the stepmother's gaze lingered, too long, too knowing. She had ruled their lives with intimidation and charm, and she sensed when something had slipped from her control. Later, in the quiet of their chamber, the brother unwrapped the book again. Its secrets spread before them, like a map to their freedom. Every page named someone, judges, merchants, allies their father once trusted. Some had fallen silent, others had been bought by the stepmother. But among them were still names of the righteous, people with enough power to tip the balance. "We can't strike all at once," the brother said. "If she suspects, she'll destroy us before we move." The sister nodded, her eyes fierce. "Then we start small. One ally. One truth. Quietly." That night, she wrote their first letter in her careful hand, sealing it with their father's crest. The words were cautious but clear, the will was tampered with. "Evidence remains. Meet us in secret." The brother smuggled the letter out through a loyal servant, one who had loved their father too much to betray him even in death. But the stepmother was cunning. She noticed the shift, the siblings' stolen glances, the way they leaned close in whispers. That evening, she summoned them. Her chamber was lit by firelight, casting her face in shifting shadows. She smiled, but her smile was all blade. "Children," she purred, "I have been patient with your grief. But patience is not endless. If there is something you're hiding from me, speak it now. Lies rot faster than corpses." The sister's hand trembled in her lap, but she kept her voice steady. "We hide nothing." The stepmother's eyes narrowed. "Nothing." She leaned forward, her jeweled hand brushing the table. "Remember this, the walls of this house are mine. They hear, they see, they whisper to me. Nothing escapes me." When she dismissed them, the siblings walked back to their chamber with hollow steps. They knew then every move they made would be under watch. One misstep, and the truth would be burned before the world could ever see it. But as the brother closed the door behind them, his jaw hardened. "Let her watch," he said. "We'll move in shadows, just as father did. And when the time comes, she won't see the blade until it's at her throat." The sister placed the book between them, her eyes gleaming with defiance. "Then let's sharpen it." The game had begun. The days that followed were a storm inside her. She had burned her bridges with her father in that single conversation, and though it gave her a fierce satisfaction, it also left her with a hollow ache she hadn't anticipated. There were moments in the quiet of the night when she would replay his words, his pleading eyes, the desperate tremor in his voice. A part of her, buried deep but still alive, wondered if she had been too cruel, if she had crushed the last chance for reconciliation. But then the memories would rise, uninvited, the 10-year-old girl standing at the gate as he walked away, the endless birthdays spent in silence, the way he had chosen everything else over her. That pain reminded her why she could not afford softness now. Her grandmother's will had left her with not just wealth, but a responsibility. The vineyard was vast, almost alive with her grandmother's spirit. Every path, every vine, every stone seemed to carry her voice. And as she walked through those fields at dawn, watching the sun stretch golden light across the valley, she realized she had inherited more than money, she had inherited a dream. This was not something to squander on old ghosts or greedy hands. The staff respected her, though some looked at her with cautious eyes, unsure if she could carry the weight of such a legacy. She was young, untested. But when she sat in the office, signing her name on contracts, speaking with the lawyers, asking precise questions about exports and taxes, there was no trace of hesitation. She was not a child anymore, and she made sure they saw that. Her father, however, was not done. Word spread quickly, rumors of legal battles, of him hiring lawyers who believed they could challenge the will. It was absurd, laughable even, but it still pricked at her peace. She knew men like him, men who would grasp at straws, twist stories, try to drag her into the mud just to weaken her resolve. One evening, as she sat in the old library where her grandmother once read by the fire, a letter was delivered. She hesitated before opening it, recognizing the shaky scrawl of her father's handwriting. Inside, the words bled with desperation, apologies, explanations, excuses. He wrote of debts, of failing health, of mistakes he could never undo. He wrote of wanting just a place in her life, not her fortune. She read it twice, her eyes dry, her hands steady. For a fleeting second, the ache in her chest pulsed stronger, but she folded the letter neatly and placed it back into the envelope. Then she set it on the fire. The flames devoured it, curling the paper into ash, carrying his words into smoke. As she watched it burn, she whispered softly, not for him, not for the world, but for herself. "You chose your absence. Now I choose mine." It was not anger that filled her anymore, but clarity. Her path was forward, into a future she would build with her own hands. And if her father lingered in the shadows, clawing at what? Clawing at what he could never reclaim, then so be it. The storm did not come from the sky, but from the courtroom. Within weeks, her father had filed his case. The news spread like wildfire across the valley. A man who abandoned his daughter now demanded his share of her inheritance. Newspapers twisted the story, some painting him as a desperate man clinging to survival, others exposing his past cruelty. Reporters lingered outside the gates of the vineyard, hoping for a glimpse of the heiress who had become a symbol of defiance. She hated the attention, but she did not flinch from it. Dressed in calm elegance, she gave no interviews, no statements. Instead, she let her silence speak. She would not be reduced to headlines. Her focus remained on the vineyard, where harvest season was approaching. Workers looked to her for leadership, and she gave it organizing, directing, ensuring the traditions her grandmother had built were honored. But at night, when the valley slept, her resolve was tested. She pored over old records, wills, legal documents, ensuring every detail was ironclad. Her lawyers reassured her, the will was airtight, her grandmother's intentions crystal clear. Still, she knew her father. He had never fought for her, but he would fight for money until his last breath. The day of the first hearing arrived. She stepped into the courthouse with steady steps, her head high. Her father was already seated, his face pale but his eyes burning with the hunger of a man cornered. For the briefest moment, she felt like that little girl again, longing for him to turn toward her with love. But then his lawyer rose, speaking words that turned her stomach. My client was denied his rightful place as a father. He seeks not only financial restitution but the restoration of his relationship with his daughter, which was unfairly severed. The hypocrisy of it made her blood run cold. He was not here for her heart. He was here for her inheritance. Yet he dressed it in the language of love, trying to sway the judge, the crowd, anyone who would listen. When it was her turn, she did not tremble. Her lawyer spoke facts, clear and sharp. 15 years of abandonment, no support, no presence, no love. The will was valid. Her grandmother's choice was absolute. And when the judge asked if she wished to say anything, she rose. Her voice did not waver. I am not denying him love, she said, her gaze locked on her father. He denied himself that when he left me at 10 years old. What he wants now is not reconciliation, it is wealth. I cannot give him what he never gave me. The room fell silent. Even her father, for once, had no words. When she left the courtroom, the cameras flashed, questions were hurled, but she walked past them all. She knew this was only the beginning of a long battle, but she was no longer afraid. The vineyard, the legacy, the life she had built, it was hers. And no storm, no matter how loud, could strip it away. The trial dragged on for weeks. Every morning, she arrived at the courthouse dressed in calm dignity, and every evening, she returned to the vineyard to check on the harvest. She lived in two worlds now, one of sunlight and soil, where grapes ripened under her care, and one of shadows and lies, where her father spun stories in front of judges and strangers. But slowly, the cracks began to show in his armor. At first, his lawyer painted him as a victim, a man who had made mistakes, yes, but who deserved forgiveness. Yet beneath the polished speeches, truth had a way of leaking through. Witnesses from her childhood were called. Old neighbors. Teachers. People who remembered the girl who waited outside her school gates, hoping her father would come. They told stories, not cruelly, but honestly. How she used to sit alone during school plays because no parent showed up. How she came to class hungry. How she wore the same torn shoes for 2 winters. Each word was a knife to his case. And while her father sat there pretending to be wounded, she caught the flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, not sorrow, but anger at being exposed. One afternoon, during a recess, he approached her in the hallway. For the first time in 15 years, they stood face to face without the buffer of lawyers or judges. His voice was low, strained. You could end this, he said. Give me a portion. You don't need all of it. Do you know how much pressure I'm under? People are watching me. She cut him off. People watched me too. When I was 10, crying for you. When I was 15, working after school just to eat. When I buried the only woman who loved me. No one came for me then. And now, you dare speak of pressure?" He faltered, his mask slipping. For the first time, she saw him not as the towering figure from her childhood, but as a weak man aging, desperate, drowning in his own failures. The next day, his desperation grew louder. His lawyer produced forged letters, claiming they were attempts he had made to contact her over the years. But the ink was fresh, the paper too new. The judge's eyebrows lifted, the courtroom buzzed. The forgery was obvious, and the credibility of his case collapsed further. Still, he fought. Day after day, he clawed at every loophole, every angle. But she fought too, not with tricks, but with truth. And each time she spoke, the room leaned in, because she carried not only her pain but her grandmother's voice, her legacy. One evening, exhausted after another long day, she walked through the vineyard rows alone. The golden sunset spread across the valley, painting the grapes in firelight. She touched the vines, whispering softly as if to her grandmother, "I will not let him take this from us. Not now. Not ever." A wind stirred through the leaves, gentle, almost like an answer. She stood there until the stars appeared, stronger than ever, ready for the battles yet to come. The courthouse had become a second battlefield, but outside its stone walls, another war was beginning. Her father had realized the legal fight was slipping from his grasp. The forged letters had backfired, the witnesses' testimonies had shredded his claims, and even his lawyer now spoke with unease. But desperation is a dangerous thing, it makes a man reckless. And reckless was exactly what he became. One morning, she woke to the sound of her phone buzzing endlessly. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. When she opened the newsfeed, her heart lurched. Her father had gone to the press. Headlines screamed. Father fights ungrateful daughter for rightful inheritance. Vineyard fortune sparks family feud. Abandoned father or neglected child. The battle for millions. He had given interviews, his face smeared with carefully manufactured grief. Cameras captured him weeping, clutching old photographs of her as a child, pictures she hadn't seen in years. He told the world he had always loved her, always searched for her, but cruel forces had kept them apart. The public, hungry for drama, devoured the story. Overnight, she went from quiet vineyard owner to unwilling headline. Reporters camped outside her gates. Drones buzzed over her vines. Every move she made was dissected, every silence twisted. At first, the noise rattled her. She had fought so hard in court to protect the truth, yet outside, lies spread faster than fire. Strangers judged her, accusing her of greed, of coldness, of betrayal. But then, something unexpected happened. Former workers from the vineyard came forward. Friends of her grandmother. Old teachers. People who had no reason to lie. They began speaking to the press, not for money, not for fame, but because they remembered her. They told stories of her childhood, of her loneliness, of her grandmother's sacrifices. They spoke of her honesty, her kindness, her resilience. And slowly, the tide shifted. The headlines began to change. Community rallies around woman in inheritance battle. Truth behind father's claims begins to crack. Who really built the vineyard? Her father, once so confident in his manipulation, began to unravel under the new glare. Reporters dug deeper into his past, unearthing debts, failed ventures, and a trail of broken promises. The man who had tried to paint himself as a victim was exposed as the architect of his own downfall. But he wasn't finished, not yet. On the final week of the trial, he made one last desperate move. He stormed into the courtroom, papers clutched in his hands, shouting about hidden documents, secret wills, proof that she had manipulated her grandmother. His voice cracked, his face red with fury. The judge's gavel slammed, demanding order. Lawyers scrambled. Spectators gasped. But when the papers were examined, the truth was undeniable. They were fabrications. Poorly constructed, sloppily forged, reeking of panic. Silence fell over the courtroom. His lawyer quietly stepped away from the table, no longer willing to defend him. And her father, trembling with rage, realized at last that his empire of lies had collapsed entirely. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply sat, steady and calm, carrying the quiet strength of her grandmother within her. The storm was almost over. But the final judgment, the one that would decide everything, was still to come. The courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, makes your heartbeat sound like thunder in your own ears. She sat at her table, hands folded, her grandmother's old scarf wrapped around her wrist like a quiet shield. Across the aisle, her father slumped in his chair. His hair, once combed neatly for the cameras, was disheveled. His eyes darted, restless, like a man searching for a door that no longer existed. The judge entered. All rose. The shuffle of chairs echoed like waves in a cavern. For weeks, the trial had been a storm. Accusations, witnesses, documents, lies and truths tangled like vines. But now, everything had narrowed to this single moment. The judge's voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of finality. This court has reviewed all evidence, testimony, and documents provided. It is clear that the late grandmother's will was written freely, without coercion. It is also clear that the plaintiff, he paused, eyes cutting briefly toward her father, engaged in deceitful attempts to manipulate the process through forgery and misrepresentation. Her father shifted, his jaw clenching. Therefore, the judge continued, the vineyard and all assets therein shall remain with the rightful heir, the granddaughter. A sound escaped her chest, half breath, half relief. Not triumph, not joy, but release. The chains of doubt that had bound her since the beginning fell away in an instant. Across the aisle, her father erupted. He shot to his feet, voice cracking, shouting about betrayal, about injustice, about bloodlines. The bailiffs moved quickly, steady but firm, guiding him out as his protests echoed down the marble halls. She didn't move. Didn't turn to look. For the first time, she understood, his power over her had never been real. It had been built only on fear and her silence. And now, both were gone. The people who had stood by her, the workers, the friends, the ones who remembered, smiled through tears. Some clapped softly, though the judge frowned at the noise. Even her lawyer, usually so composed, gave her a nod of quiet pride. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the sun cut through the clouds. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but their noise couldn't touch her. She raised her eyes to the sky, breathing in the crisp air, and for the first time in her life, she felt the future opening before her. Not a future defined by inheritance or property. Not even by victory, but by freedom. And somewhere, deep inside, she whispered to the grandmother who had raised her. We did it. The vineyard looked different now. Not because the land had changed, but because she had. Walking through the rows of vines, she no longer felt like an imposter in someone else's legacy. These fields, lush green leaves trembling in the late afternoon breeze, were hers to protect, to nurture, to carry forward. The workers greeted her with warm smiles. Some tipped their hats, others simply nodded with respect. But in their eyes, she saw something deeper, trust. They had weathered storms with her doubts, lawsuits, betrayal, and now they stood ready for whatever future she would build. At the old stone house on the hill, her grandmother's scarf hung framed by the window. She had placed it there the night after the verdict, so it would always catch the sunlight, a reminder that love and sacrifice outlast everything else. But freedom didn't come without echoes. Her father's shadow lingered. Newspapers detailed his downfall. Debts unpaid, business partners abandoning him, his reputation collapsing under the weight of his greed. He had become a cautionary tale whispered in financial circles, a man who tried to claim an empire but lost his own name instead. She thought about him sometimes, not with hatred, not even with sorrow, but with a strange kind of distance. He had been the ghost that haunted her childhood, the storm that threatened her future. But now, he was simply gone. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the vineyard in gold, she stood on the balcony with a glass of wine. Her closest friends gathered around, laughter spilling like music. They weren't celebrating wealth or victory. They were celebrating survival. She raised her glass. To the roots that keep us grounded, she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to carry her heart, and the wings that let us fly. They clinked glasses. The sound rang out against the hills, carried by the wind like a promise. In that moment, she knew, this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning. A beginning built not on inheritance, not on revenge, but on love, resilience, and the courage to choose her own path. Somewhere beyond the vineyard, a night bird called. She closed her eyes, smiling. For the first time, the silence felt full not of absence, but of peace. The seasons changed. Summer gave way to autumn, and the vineyard shifted from vibrant greens to hues of amber and gold. The harvest had come early this year, the grapes heavy and sweet. She walked the fields with the workers, her boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. Every cluster of grapes told a story of storms survived, of sun and rain, of patience rewarded. It reminded her of herself. The legal battles, the courtroom showdowns, the shadows of abandonment, they were part of her soil, her history. Pain had shaped her, but it had not defined her. Like the vines, she had learned to bend without breaking. In the evenings, she began writing letters. Letters to her grandmother, never sent but carefully tucked into a journal. She wrote about the vineyard, about the people who worked there, about the sunsets that seemed more brilliant now than ever. She confessed her fears, her hopes, her uncertainties. "You gave me a home," she wrote in one letter. "Not just of stone and wood, but of belonging. I promise I will keep it alive, not because it's mine, but because it was ours." But she also began to dream bigger. The vineyard wasn't just land, it was possibility. She decided to open a scholarship fund in her grandmother's name, dedicated to children who had lost parents, children who felt abandoned by the world. No child should ever feel the way she once did, unwanted, unseen. When the first letter of acceptance arrived months later, from a young girl who wanted to study agriculture but lacked the means, tears filled her eyes. She felt her grandmother's presence in that moment, as though the old woman was smiling at her from the sunlit hills. Not everything was easy. Some nights, loneliness still crept in. Some mornings, doubt still whispered. But she had learned the greatest lesson of all: strength wasn't the absence of weakness. Strength was choosing to keep walking, even when the path felt uncertain. One crisp evening, as she watched the vineyard lights flicker against the twilight, she whispered to herself, "This is my legacy. Not wealth, not revenge, but love that continues." And for the first time in years, she felt light like the vines, always reaching upward, always toward the sun. The vineyard had settled into a rhythm. The scholarship fund was growing, the workers trusted her leadership, and for the first time in her life, she felt something close to peace. But peace has a way of being tested. It was a Sunday afternoon when the knock came. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of crushed grapes from the presses. She opened the heavy wooden door, expecting to see a delivery driver, maybe one of the staff. Instead, her heart froze. Standing there, older but unmistakable, was her father. His once dark hair had thinned, his shoulders hunched slightly, but his eyes, those same calculating eyes, were sharp as ever. He looked smaller than she remembered, not physically but in presence. Time had worn him down. "Hello," he said softly, as though the word itself was fragile. "May I come in?" She didn't answer immediately. Every instinct told her to slam the door, to protect the sanctuary she had built. But curiosity, perhaps even something deeper, held her still. She stepped aside. Inside, he looked around slowly, as though the walls themselves accused him. His hands trembled faintly, and she noticed for the first time that his clothes, though neat, were worn. "I heard about the vineyard," he said. "About the inheritance. And about you." Her jaw tightened. "You heard because you came to take it once. Why are you here now?" He winced. "I deserve that." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke again. "I didn't come for money," he said. "I came because I don't have much time. The doctors, well, they've given me months, not years. And I realized that I couldn't leave this world without trying to face the biggest mistake of my life." Her breath caught. His voice cracked, not in manipulation, but in something rawer. "Regret. Leaving you," he whispered. "Abandoning you. I thought I was choosing freedom. But all I chose was emptiness. The old ache burned in her chest. She wanted to scream, to rage, to tell him he had forfeited any right to stand here. And yet another part of her, the part that had grown through the vineyard's lessons, wondered if forgiveness was another form of strength. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "I don't ask for forgiveness," he replied. "Only a chance, to be seen, just once, not as the man who left, but as the man who came back." She looked at him, at the lines on his face, the fragility in his stance. He was no longer the towering figure of her childhood, no longer the ghost of abandonment. He was simply a man. Broken. And in that moment, she realized, the choice was hers. The silence between them stretched like a wire pulled too tight. She could hear the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway, the whisper of the vineyard's breeze through the open window. Her father stood awkwardly, as though afraid his very presence might shatter the fragile peace of the room. Every memory pressed in on her, the nights she had cried herself to sleep, the mornings she woke to emptiness, the birthdays marked by absence. His abandonment had been a wound that shaped her entire life. And now he stood before her, asking for, what? A second chance? Closure? Redemption? She folded her arms. Why now? Why after all these years? His eyes lowered. Because I wasted them. I told myself I would come back once I had something to give. But I never built anything. Never earned anything. And then, when I finally realized what I had lost, it was already too late. He hesitated, then added quietly, "I saw your grandmother once, years ago. She told me you were strong. That you didn't need me. And I convinced myself she was right. That maybe staying away was better. But it wasn't. It was cowardice." Her chest ached. Part of her wanted to drive him out, to tell him his words changed nothing. Another part whispered that maybe strength wasn't just about walls. It was also about knowing when to lower them. She drew a long breath. "I can't undo the pain you caused me. I can't erase the child who waited by the window for a father who never came home." He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his weathered cheek. "But," she continued, her voice softening, "I can choose what I carry forward. You won't be my father in the way you should have been. But maybe, you can be something, for whatever time you have left." His eyes opened, filled with stunned relief. "You mean, you'll let me stay?" She nodded slowly. "On my terms. No manipulation. No demands. You don't get the vineyard, you don't get my forgiveness. But you get honesty. And perhaps, a little peace." He exhaled shakily, as though a weight had been lifted from his chest. In that moment, she realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing herself from its chains. She wasn't letting him back in for his sake. She was doing it for hers. For a few fleeting weeks, peace seemed possible. She worked in the vineyard, hands stained with grape juice, the rhythm of pruning and tending grounding her. Her father kept his distance, helping with repairs on the old barn, occasionally offering small gestures: a fixed door hinge, a cleaned path, a mended fence. But beneath the surface, shadows gathered. Her uncle had not disappeared after the reading of the will. He lingered, circling like a vulture. Rumors spread through the village that he was challenging the inheritance, claiming undue influence, whispering that her grandmother had been manipulated in her final years. One evening, a letter arrived, official, cold, and threatening. The estate was being contested in court. Her stomach dropped as she read the words. The vineyard, her sanctuary, the one place that carried her grandmother's love, was under attack again. Her father stood in the doorway as she crumpled the letter in her fist. His face darkened. "He won't stop until he destroys you. Or takes everything." She met his gaze, trembling but fierce. "Then we fight. This vineyard isn't just land, it's my life. My grandmother's legacy. I won't let him steal it." Her father nodded, something steely returning to his eyes. "Then we'll fight together." It was strange, unthinkable, even to find an ally in the man who had once abandoned her. Yet, as the storm gathered over the vineyard, she knew she couldn't face it alone. The battlefield was no longer just in her heart. It was in the courts, in the village whispers, in the ruthless greed of a man who had never learned the meaning of love. And for the first time, she realized, the true inheritance wasn't wealth. It was the courage to protect what mattered. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and cold marble, but beneath its surface lay centuries of human conflict, families torn apart, legacies destroyed, battles not of swords but of words. She sat at the long table, her palms sweating despite the papers neatly stacked before her. Beside her sat a lawyer recommended by her grandmother's old friend, steady and confident. On the other side of the aisle, her uncle leaned back in his chair, smug, his suit tailored too perfectly, as if wealth could dress up greed. The judge entered, stern and tired, as though he had seen this kind of fight too many times. This case concerns the inheritance of the late Mrs. Evelyn Moreau's estate, he began. Specifically, the vineyard property and assets. Her uncle's lawyer rose, his voice sharp, practiced. Your Honor, it is our position that the young woman here manipulated her grandmother in her final years. That undue influence led to the will being changed in her favor. My client, the rightful blood relative, was unjustly excluded. The words hit her like stones. Manipulated? As if her love for her grandmother had been a scheme. Her lawyer stood slowly. Your Honor, the will was written with full clarity of mind. We have medical records, testimonies, and witnesses to prove it. Mrs. Moreau left her estate to the one person who cared for her, who lived with her, who carried her burdens in the last years of her life, her granddaughter. That is not undue influence. That is love rewarded. The courtroom murmured. Her uncle smirked, whispering something to his lawyer. But as the proceedings unfolded, witnesses came forward, the village doctor, who testified to her grandmother's sharp mind, the vineyard workers, who spoke of the bond between grandmother and granddaughter, even the local priest, who said, Mrs. Moreau often told me her granddaughter was the only family she had left in truth, not just in name. She sat, her chest tightening with every word. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was her grandmother's voice echoing through others, defending her even from beyond the grave. Her uncle's face hardened as the tide turned. His arguments grew desperate, his tone harsher. But the more he spoke, the more he revealed the truth, his greed, his absence, his sudden reappearance only after the inheritance. At one point, the judge raised a hand to silence him. Mr. Moreau, this court is not blind to your intentions. By the time the day ended, the balance was clear. The vineyard was not slipping through her fingers. And yet, as she left the courthouse, her father walking silently beside her, she knew this wasn't over. People like her uncle didn't disappear quietly. They circled back, found new weapons, new schemes. But for the first time, she felt something powerful within her, an inheritance of courage, of loyalty, of unbreakable love. And she was ready for whatever storm came next. The courthouse doors swung shut behind her with a hollow thud that seemed to echo down the marble steps. For hours she had sat under fluorescent lights, her heart pounding with every accusation, every counterpoint, every lie her uncle tried to weave into truth. And yet, she had walked out with the vineyard still hers. But victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt heavy, fragile, like a candle shielding its flame against the wind. Her father walked beside her, hands in his pockets, his steps slow and uneven. The same man who had abandoned her 15 years ago now matched her pace, as though he were afraid to move too far ahead or fall too far behind. Neither spoke. The city's noise wrapped around them, horns, chatter, the shuffle of feet, but between the two of them stretched a silence more deafening than any courtroom gavel. Finally, he cleared his throat. You handled yourself well in there. The words sounded clumsy, too small for the moment. She almost laughed, bitter and sharp, but stopped herself. Instead, she said softly, I wasn't alone. She was with me. He looked at her then, guilt flickering in his eyes, as if he knew exactly who she meant. Your grandmother raised a fighter, he murmured. No, she replied, meeting his gaze. She raised someone who doesn't run away. The words hung between them like a verdict of their own. He looked down, shame pressing his shoulders. For the first time, she saw not the father who had abandoned her, but a man broken by choices he could never undo. They walked on until the courthouse disappeared behind them, swallowed by the city. Ahead lay the vineyard, the life her grandmother left her, the weight of legacy pressing on her shoulders. And somewhere out there, she knew, her uncle was already plotting his next move. But for this one quiet walk, she let herself breathe. The vineyard should have felt safe. Rows of vines stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun, the air rich with the scent of ripening grapes. It was the land her grandmother had nurtured with love and devotion, the land now entrusted to her. But today, something felt wrong. As she walked between the rows, her fingers brushing the leaves, she noticed broken tendrils on the ground. Branches snapped carelessly. A barrel in the storage shed stood leaking, a deep purple stain spreading across the dirt floor. Tools had been left scattered, some bent, some missing entirely. Her chest tightened. This wasn't neglect. It was sabotage. "Uncle," she whispered to herself, bitterness rising like bile. He had failed in court, but here in the soil, where her grandmother's blood, sweat, and love still lingered, he was striking again. Later that evening, she gathered the workers in the old stone courtyard. Their faces were weary, suspicious, some frightened. These were men and women who had once answered to her uncle, who had seen him bark orders and cut corners. "I know what's happening," she told them, her voice steady. "I know someone is trying to tear this vineyard apart from the inside. But listen to me, this land is not his. It's ours. It belongs to every hand that has touched it with care, every family that has depended on its harvest." A murmur swept through the group. Some nodded, some looked away, uncertain. One elderly worker, her grandmother's most loyal foreman, stepped forward. "We'll stand with you. But you must be prepared. He won't stop." That night, as the vineyard lay under a blanket of stars, she stood at the balcony of the old estate house. Her father found her there, leaning against the railing. "He'll push harder now," he said. "I know. You'll need allies." She looked at him, her heart caught between distrust and the faintest ember of hope. Could she rely on him now, after so many years of absence? Or was this another shadow waiting to betray her? The vines rustled in the midnight breeze, whispering secrets of the battles yet to come. And in the silence of that vineyard night, she made a promise to herself: if her uncle wanted war, she would give him one. The morning began with a scream. One of the workers burst into the courtyard, his clothes singed, his voice broken. "The West Field. It's burning." Her heart stopped. She ran through the vineyard paths, her feet pounding against the dirt, until the thick smell of smoke clawed at her lungs. Flames licked at the vines, racing greedily across the dry soil, devouring leaves, grapes, and years of labor in a frenzy of orange light. Workers formed a desperate line with buckets, passing water from the well. Others swung heavy blankets, beating at the fire with bare hands blistering from the heat. But the blaze was spreading faster than they could contain it. Her father appeared beside her, grabbing a hose and shouting orders with the authority of a man who had once commanded men on construction sites and battlefields alike. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who left, but as a fighter, someone who refused to let her inheritance turn to ash. "Keep the windward side wet," he yelled. "Cut the burning vines. Don't let it jump rows." She picked up a blade herself, slashing through burning branches, sparks stinging her arms. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with soot. Every swing felt like cutting through her grandmother's legacy, yet saving what she could demanded sacrifice. Hours later, when the fire was finally beaten back, the Westfield was a blackened graveyard. The vines were charred skeletons against the pale sky. She sank to her knees in the ash, tears streaking paths down her dirt-covered face. Her father knelt beside her, his hand hesitating before resting gently on her shoulder. "This wasn't an accident," she whispered hoarsely. He nodded grimly. "Your uncle won't stop until he destroys everything she left you." Her fists clenched in the ash. "Then he'll learn something my grandmother taught me." She rose to her feet, eyes blazing. The vines grow back stronger after fire. That night, under the weary silence of the vineyard, she drafted her plan. If her uncle wanted to play with fire, she would answer with strategy, and this time, she wouldn't fight alone. The vineyard slept restlessly that night. Charred air still lingered, and every creak of wood in the farmhouse carried the echo of fire. But inside, her mind refused to rest. She spread maps of the vineyard across the long wooden table, her grandmother's old ledgers and contracts scattered around her like an army's war plans. The fire hadn't destroyed her, it had awakened her. Her father sat across from her, silent but steady. For the first time, there was no distance, no wall of guilt between them. He watched her not as a child, but as a leader. "We can't fight him in court alone," she said, tapping the papers. "He has money, lawyers, influence. If we go one-on-one, he'll drain us until we bleed." Her father leaned forward. "So what's your plan?" She inhaled sharply. "We turn the vineyard into more than a business. We turn it into a movement." The next morning, she gathered the workers in the courtyard. They came with tired faces, scarred hands, and eyes still red from smoke. She looked at them, one by one, the people who had carried the vineyard's soul long before she inherited it. "I know you're afraid," she began, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength. "I know the fire nearly broke us. But listen to me, this vineyard isn't just mine. It's ours. My grandmother believed in every one of you. She gave her life to make sure this place lived, and I'll do the same." A murmur rippled through them. She stepped closer, raising her chin. "My uncle thinks money gives him power. But we have something he'll never understand: loyalty. Family. Roots deeper than fire can burn." The courtyard fell silent. Then an old worker, whose hands had planted the very vines now turned to ash, stepped forward. "You saved the fields with us. You fought beside us. That makes you one of us." One by one, heads nodded. Murmurs became shouts. The vineyard's people rallied, their voices echoing off the stone walls. By nightfall, her plan was in motion. A cooperative alliance. The workers would own shares in the vineyard. Profits would be divided fairly. Their sweat and sacrifice would no longer be invisible. Together, they would shield the vineyard not just with labor but with unity. Her father placed his hand on hers as she signed the first papers. "This was never just an inheritance," he said softly. "It was a revolution waiting for you to ignite it." And far away, in his marble office, her uncle received the news that the workers he thought were pawns had turned into an army. His lips curled into a smile, cold and sharp. "Let her gather her little soldiers," he muttered. "I'll crush them all at once." The sun rose over the vineyard like a promise. Rows of vines, green and strong, stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Birds circled overhead, their calls sharp and joyous, as if celebrating a victory that had been earned not through gold, but through courage, loyalty, and love. Her uncle arrived that morning, dressed in a suit that seemed smaller than his ambition, flanked by lawyers and cameras. He had expected fear, submission. He had expected her to crumble under pressure. Instead, he found her standing at the center of the vineyard, surrounded by the workers who had become more than employees, they were family. Their hands were calloused, their faces weathered, but their eyes burned with determination. Her father stood beside her, quiet and strong, his presence no longer a shadow of abandonment, but a shield of protection. Together, they faced the man who had tried to take everything from them. Her uncle sneered. "You think you can fight me with a handful of peasants? This vineyard is mine by blood, by law, by greed," she interrupted, her voice calm but commanding. "No. You forgot the one thing you can never buy: loyalty. These people, this land, this legacy, they are mine, not because of law, but because of love. You see, love builds stronger roots than any will ever can." The legal documents in her hand glinted in the sunlight. Evidence of his schemes, forged contracts, manipulations, all presented, undeniable, meticulously gathered over weeks. His lawyers faltered, his smirk vanished, and the cameras captured the unraveling of a man who had built his empire on lies. One by one, the workers stepped forward, testifying, declaring their stake, their commitment, their truth. The village rallied behind her, proof that the vineyard belonged to its heart, not its papers. Her uncle's fury boiled over, but there was no path to victory. The court had seen, the witnesses had spoken, and the community had stood. His wealth, his influence, his threats, they meant nothing here. Finally, he slumped into his chair, defeated. Not just by law, but by the undeniable power of love, loyalty, and integrity. She turned to her father, and for the first time, they smiled together. Not as estranged family, not as adversaries, but as survivors. The workers began pruning the burnt edges of the vineyard, tending to the vines that had weathered fire and greed alike. She walked among them, touching leaves, feeling the pulse of life beneath her fingertips. Her gaze lifted to the horizon, where the sun blazed gold. She whispered to herself, and to the grandmother who had built this world for her. We did it. Not through revenge, not through anger, but through strength, love, and the courage to stand tall. And as the wind carried the scent of grapes and soil across the hills, she realized something profound. The true inheritance had never been money or property. It had been the power to protect what she loved, to forgive when it mattered, and to grow stronger after every storm. The vineyard thrived. She thrived. And in that golden light, the past was finally at peace. The story was over, but the legacy, her legacy, would endure forever. As the vineyard basked in golden sunlight, she turned to the camera. Or to the viewers watching from across the world, and smiled softly. This story was more than inheritance or revenge. It was about courage, love, and standing tall when life tests you the most. If you felt every heartbeat of this journey with me, make sure to join us for more stories that touch the soul and ignite the heart. Subscribe to AiNeuraBeat and turn on notifications so you never miss an emotional journey like this one. Every story here is cinematic, real, and unforgettable, crafted to stay with you long after the screen fades to black.